Day 10, Story 10, the last story in the Decameron. It's a strange little story with a very heavy biblical background, but it's another offering by finally the end of the day we get to the Oneo, the Boccaccio stand-in, so to speak, whose stories are always tend to be a little bit of the sharpest edged of all of them. And here he tells a story of a young man named Gualtieri. Gualtieri is a very wealthy young nobleman and who is the Marquis of Saluzzo, which is, I think, outside Torino, up north in the mountains. And he does not want to get married. He's a young man, has no interest in women. He likes to go out hunting, hang out with the guys, and no interest in marriage at all. His friends and his vassals, the people, the villagers and everybody around him, people who are subservient to him, and to a degree dependent on him, they want him to marry because they're concerned about, well, continuity, stability, his happiness, sure, but really it's about the continuity of the line, and let's just keep, let's keep the aristocracy where they are, let's keep the society chugging along. So they really want him to marry, and he says, all right, but I'm gonna pick my own wife, and you're gonna have to go through with it. Little ultimatum there. And he does, and he goes and he finds this this girl, and he knows two things about her. He knows her, she is a poor girl who lived in the village not far from his home, and since she was also very beautiful, he thought that life with her ought to be rather agreeable. So he knows that she's poor and she's beautiful. That's the only thing that seems to matter. Okay, beautiful, I get, he's a rich guy, young guy, presumably fairly good looking, and he wants arm candy, I think is the phrase. But he seems to like the fact that she's poor. Okay, that's good. Doesn't want him too spoiled, too affected. Likes someone a little different, maybe. But it's really more about a power dynamic. So he goes and he proposes to her father and pitches it to her and says, okay, we're gonna be married, but you have to do whatever I say. You have to agree to anything I want. Never get upset at anything he ever said or did. That, again, is some echoes of like Marie de France and, past stuff. Don't ask what I do on the weekends. I'm just going to disappear every now and then. But they get married, and they have a daughter, and the young bride, quite beautiful, and seems to just glide into her new role quite well, and everybody likes her. She is a very nice person, a very decent human being, and very gracious. And Gualtieri gets the strange idea popped into his head to test her patience by subjecting her to constant tribulations and generally making life intolerable for her. What, has he got too much time on his hands? That's his idea. I'm going to make life intolerable for you. Just, just for something to do. You don't get the sense that there's anything particularly behind that. There's no logic to it. There's no purpose to it. It's just cruelty. Yeah. Sounds good. So he starts basically, they say, goading her with words, pretending to be angry. And then he ups the stakes a little bit. He sees that that's not really getting anywhere. She is very patient. She responds to these words: my lord, do with me whatever you think best for your honor and your peace of mind, and I will be entirely content with it, for I know that I am your social inferior. That's remarkably humble. And how does he react to that? Does he say, wow, that is really, really something? But instead he just gets more cruel, and he says, well, all right, you like our daughter? I'm going to send her away. And he tells one of the servants or someone that you have to take my daughter away. Take her to my cousin's house. She's out of town. But don't tell my wife. Don't tell my wife that that's where she's going, because I've got something else planned. And then he tells his wife, yeah, I had her put to death. He again excuses it on the grounds of like class distinctions. He says, well, the people are very upset that, I'm a great gentleman. My family has been in charge for all these generations, and you're nobody, and your kids are thus kind of spoiled and contaminated. So, what are you going to do? The wife takes it. Her name is Griselda, by the way. And they have another child, a little boy, and same thing happens. A couple of years later, yeah, I'm going to send him away. Just get him out of here. The people, they're upset. These little, the son of the shepherd or whatever is, the daughter of the shepherd gives birth to this little brat, and they're going to be in charge? No, can't have it. So that, again, the wife just takes it. She feels it. She's sad about it, but okay. You're in charge. You're the big guy. This is what I agreed to. Go for it. And then he amps it up again. He says, I've decided, now that we have, we've been together for a few years now, you're getting a little old for me. So I'm gonna cast you out, and I'm gonna get married to a much younger, prettier girl. And yeah, so pack your bags, go. And he throws her out. He throws her out with nothing. She leaves in just like barefoot with an old shift, I think it's called. It's like a little, I don't know, underclothes essentially, like a little underdress or something like that. Basically, she gets tossed out in her underwear. And she still takes it. She comes back when he says, okay, now wait a minute, I'm going to have a wedding for my new bride, who's really beautiful. You should come back. I don't have enough servants to really do it properly. I'm going to make a big shebang about it. I'm going to have everybody in, and I'm going to need some help taking care of this. So I need some extra servants around. So you come back and you can be a servant for my new bride. And she does. She comes back and she waits on this new bride, who is all of around 12 years old, and she accepts it. She tolerates it. She swallows it. And when Gualtieri sees this, he sees that no event, however outrageous, had ever produced any sort of change in her at all. Moreover, he felt sure that her reaction was not just the result of obtuseness, since he knew just how wise she was. He therefore decided that it was time to deliver her from the bitter sorrow he guessed she she was keeping hidden beneath her impassive exterior, and he summoned her. And then he says, I was kidding. It's all a gag. It's all a joke. Don't take it so seriously. The bride? Oh, yeah, that's our daughter. I just had her brought back. You haven't seen her in a few years. She's now like 13 or 12 or something like that, marriageable age. And, that's all a lie. And he had their son there, and the whole family is reunited, and this woman is suddenly like whisked away and dressed in all of the fancy clothes again, and suddenly she's beautiful again, and she's restored to dignity. And he tells her, Griselda, the time has finally come for both for you to taste the fruit of your long patience, and for those who have done me cruel, unjust, and brutish to realize that what I've done for a deliberate end in view. For I wanted to teach you how to be a wife, to teach them how to manage one, and at the same time to beget for myself perpetual peace and quiet for the rest of my life with you. He broke her. He had to check that he could break her, but he didn't. He wanted to make sure she could endure. He wanted to make sure that she could take the punishment, be humble in the face of unimaginable cruelty, of unimaginable indifference to her feelings. Now, on the one hand, this does sound like another Shakespeare core, because this is essentially the plot of Taming of the Shrew, where the man has to break down the woman to be marriageable, essentially. But it's also, that's Shakespeare's going to do different things with that again. But it's also hearkening back to the earlier story of Job in the Bible. Job was a one of the wiser figures who saw his entire life in the Bible, who saw his entire life just get destroyed. He had everything taken from him just on a whim, on the devil and God talking smack one afternoon and saying, well, let's just experiment a little. I bet Job will, curse you. I bet Job isn't really as patient and humble as you say, God. So, let me go and let's take everything away from him and see how he reacts. And Job swallows it, but he questions. Here we have essentially the same story, only the Job figure is Griselda, and Gualtieri is God. Cruelty, indifference. He sees her suffering for years. She sent away her own children. She was stripped of all dignity. He sees that suffering, and he's just sort of playing it out and watching it happen, studying her. We want to know how she reacts. Now, on the one hand, this is a guiding theme of the Renaissance, this kind of empirical instinct to want to test things. You've been told things all your life about how things are. You've read in books how things are. Authorities hand down to you how things are. And the Renaissance pushes that back a little and says, well, no, I want to see with my own eyes. I want to test my beliefs. I want to look around and see, is this really how things are? So Dionio, in telling this story, is really putting the whole book of the Decameron under a kind of scrutiny, because everything in the Decameron is doing just that, just testing people, looking at them from different angles of all the time. Just look at that, like the beginning stories with all the religious hypocrisies. You're seeing things from the Jewish angle, from the Christian angle, and from the Muslim angle. You're seeing different kinds of societies interact. You're seeing different people reacting in ways that maybe you don't expect, or that you expect them to react one way based on how they how a similar story might play out in a book, but in fact they don't turn out that way, because reality is different than the authorities written in books tell us. And this gets to the heart of the Renaissance. And this is how Boccaccio fits in with that and presages the Renaissance to come. He is a very early figure, but he's very much in that tradition. He is moving closer and closer to that. Through this story, you get a study of human beings, a study of human behavior, a study of human capacity to deal with indifference, global, celestial, divine indifference. Because again, this is about the plague. This is the plague. People are dying en masse, untold mass. Hundreds of thousands and millions of people around the globe are dying because of this plague, because of this infection, this contagion that is spreading, and nobody knows how. Nobody can make any sense of it. They're just dying. And here we have this little cell of people, this polite little party of aristocrats sitting around telling little stories, making light of everything, and trying to have this lovely little garden party, this 2-week siesta. But it's all because they know that back out there, it's still a horror show. People are just dropping in the street. People are dying and festering in their own houses when people are afraid to go in the houses to bring out the bodies. They are confused. They are scared. They don't understand what's happening. Can they endure that? That's what this story is about. Can they make sense of it? And can they power through it? Because if they can get through by clinging together, like Griselda just holds down, takes it, and she stays in the marriage. Maybe if you stick together, you can find something. Maybe you can outrun the suffering. That's what's going on in Decameron.